Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the T&E Committee. Today we'll be continuing our discussion of the CIP, including WSSC, solid waste management, and stormwater management. WSSC's proposed CIP includes the acquisition of a new customer resource building adjacent to their headquarters, in addition to a variety of projects to keep their system in a state of good repair. Keith?
Yeah, I have a pretty extensive packet, which I don't want to go through word for word, but WSSC did prepare a summary of their CIP, which I think would be helpful to go through, especially since we have some newer committee members here that are not as familiar. And so I think we'd start with that and have our folks come up and introduce themselves. And then once we've gone through that, then the issues that we did not touch on, I think we need to, I will bring back, make sure we get to those. And then obviously any questions committee members have, they can, please bring up at any time, so I think we have the right people here to answer them. So why don't we start with introductions?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hooker and T&E committee members. My name is Carla Reed, and I am the General Manager CEO of WSSC Water. We did bring quite a team to answer any questions. Oh, embarrassed? I'm sorry.
Your first time here. If you want to.
Keep going.
You're good.
Okay.
This is my picture.
All right, great.
Sure.
So we did bring quite a team with us here today, and I'd like to introduce the people at the table as well as our commissioners. Our commissioners, including our vice chair, are here with us today. Our vice chair, Eloise Foster, and Commissioner Barnett, and
Welcome.
Commissioner Dennis. And
Welcome back.
At the table, we have our deputy. I'm great. I'm in another category. Yes. Joe Beach, and then we have our chief financial officer, Patty Callahan. We have Mark Brackett, who is the manager of our capital program, and then Jay Price, who is our deputy general manager for operations, and we have also our deputy general manager for administration in the audience. So any question you have for us, we're ready. And we want to
Apparently.
thank Keith Lachenko for his thorough package and for all of his support and questions that he asked us along the way.
It's a terrific packet.
Yeah, we have the slides that they're going to be referring to are start on circle page 76 of the memo. We're also trying to project them up here, but the text is a little small on the screen, so you're probably going to want to refer to your packet. With the slides.
What page was that?
Okay, good afternoon. For the record, Patty Callahan, Chief Financial Officer, and I'm pointing to change slides. We're here today to talk about our FY21 capital budget, and it starts with our strategic priorities, spending affordability, and our capital improvement program. I'll support these priorities at WSSC Water. We want to optimize our infrastructure, looking for industry-leading reliability and asset integrity. We want to spend our customer dollars wisely. It's very important that we do that, improve our operational efficiency, improve our fixed asset utilization, and improve our financial process efficiency and our fiscal sustainability. Slide. Our FY21 capital budget CIP review process includes work sessions with our general manager in July, work sessions with the counties July 9th and 10th, work sessions with our commissioners July 17th, and our public hearing process September 4th and 5th. We receive approval to transmit in September on the 18th, and we work with both counties to review our budget, and by May 20th, we hopefully finish the process with the bi-county meeting on the 7th and an adoption of our CIP by June of 2020. Our capital spending policy guidelines focus on attaining sustainability through an affordable capital improvement program. We have key financial metrics on our debt service levels. We want to balance rate and operating growth. We have limits on our new debt issuance, on our debt service expenses, and we watch very carefully to stay within our debt service coverage, which is 1.1. So when you look at our net revenues, we want to make sure we have enough coverage of our debt service 1.1 times. We're also very careful to make certain that our debt service expense as a percentage of our total expenditures stays less than 40%. We focus on our multi-year fiscal planning to make certain that our capital budget as we present to you is affordable and sustainable in the future. We look at our bond issuance limits over the 6-year period. And we want to make certain we smooth that out so there are no blips in the out years, and we keep our rates on a fairly smooth level. Let's try the next slide. Other capital spending guidelines that we have in our 6-year plan, we want to make certain that we have adequate liquidity and fund balance reserves. And to do that, we maintain a day's operating reserves on hand between 60 and 90 days. We want to make sure that our fund balance at the end is at 10% of our revenues. All of those are very important to maintain our AAA bond rating. Just of notice, we have had a growing program. Infrastructure is aging at WSSC, and from fiscal year 10 until fiscal year 20, it has grown from $371 million to $638 million, and that is to maintain a quite extensive program in both counties. And our outstanding debt, which drives a lot of our expenditures, has grown 132% from that time period, $1.36 billion to $3.16 billion. But again, we monitor that very carefully. We do our fiscal planning well, and we work with our rating agencies again to maintain an important rating. We do have an affordable CIP. It does fit within the rate increase limits through the spending affordability process, and our anticipated bond issuance limits also fit within that level. And we hope that it keeps our rates in an affordable position, and we do have programs in place to help those customers that struggle. We do have an increased use of pay-as-you-go in our long-term fiscal plan to keep those debt metrics in place, and that does help us keep our interest rates lower by investing some in cash. With that, I'm going to turn the next part of the presentation over to Mark Brackett, who is our capital budget section manager. And he will go through a few of the key projects, and then we're here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Mark Brackett, Capital Budget Section Manager. Our 6-year program is $3.7 billion. Most of that is bond funded, as I'm sure you're aware, $3.3 billion. Mandated projects make up almost a third of our spending requirements in the capital budget. The money we send down to Blue Plains for the wastewater treated down there, our 2 consent decrees we're operating under, and then other regulatory and agreements we have in place.
How many more years on Blue Plains?
That is an ongoing, about 2/3 of our wastewater flow down to Blue Plains.
Right. Wasn't there a temporary bump up for the enhancements they were making?
Enhanced nutrient removal project, and that is starting to wind down by 22. That project will be winding down.
Okay.
But they have more stuff coming to replace it.
I'm not surprised. Okay.
The fiscal year 21 capital budget is $624.3 million, approximately $55 million higher than the prior year. Again, mostly bond funded. PAYGO is at $31 million. And in the budget year, again, mandated projects make up approximately a third of our spending. And on the next slide, you just see that graphically. Due to our existing agreements and consent decrees, and they're noted down there for you. Next, when we look at the CIP, we look at major categories of spending, and for us, system improvements. This is all of our reconstruction programs, rebuilding our facilities, is all in system improvements program, over 90% of our spend in FY21. There was a smaller percentage for growth at WSSE, growth pays for growth, so that comes from developers and system development charges that we collect. Next up is, so just hand in hand with all the reconstruction work is the bonds. So nearly 90% of the 21 capital budget is funded through long-term debt. That debt drives debt service drives the rate increases. And we're adding debt faster than we're actually retiring the debt because of the expanding program. So as our CFO mentioned earlier, our debt has grown to $3.2 billion outstanding. So it's a challenge. We do have some grant money coming in through MDE, through the flush tax, the Chesapeake Bay restoration. We use that for sewer reconstruction work and also for the ENR projects. We've completed all the ENR projects at our wastewater plants, our water resource recovery facilities. And as we said, we're wrapping up the one down at Blue Plains by 22 for the most part.
What's been the trend on the flush tax?
It's increasing slightly just with population, but I think they doubled
The
the
rate's been the
tax
same?
a number of years back. I don't know when they last increased it, but for us, it's just a small increase as population.
Because it's a small percentage of
households grow.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next up. So our sewer reconstruction program, this is the small diameter work. This is where we're working in the roadways. This is where we're getting the funding from MDE for small diameter sewer reconstruction work. They pay for approximately 87.5% of the construction cost for the program. So that's a big help there. We expect to do 20 miles. That's a pretty steady state for us. Stay on that program, about $55.5 million a year. Next up is water reconstruction. Over the past 10 years, we've rehabilitated on average over 50 miles per year. And what we're doing last year and repeating again in the plan for 21 is to step back a little bit to 25 miles per year, to slow it down a little bit, and instead target that more money more towards investing in new technologies and tools we think we can that are now available as technology is increasing for us. More products are available. We think we can be more efficient and more effective and maybe even more surgical in these replacements. So we're pursuing that. We have new leak detection technology that we're looking at, the satellite technology for looking for leaks. And in FY21, we programmed to do 25 miles again this year in small diameter water, about $72.5 million.
Can you talk about the leak detection, elaborate a little bit on the leak detection on the satellite? I don't think the new committee members or the public have heard too much about that.
So apparently they have a satellite that was looking for water on Mars, and it kind of finished what it was doing there, and they decided if they turned around and pointed it at Earth, they could tell us where water was leaking. And they can look and they can tell through their technology the difference between our water, which has chlorine and trace elements in it, as opposed to fresh water. So we're doing approximately 25% of our system per year over the next 4 years, and it will tell us where water is leaking, where we can't find it or we can't see it. So it's very exciting. Like I said, new technology coming to us that's available. So I want to try and invest in that and spend the money as wisely as possible. So.
Go ahead.
So picking up on that point, last year you had shared some of those details of that technology. So 1 year later, how has that technology impacted the dollars and cents here?
Well, as I said, we were going to start ramping back up again, approximately 5 miles per year. We're putting that off a year to continue to pilot these things and the technologies that are available and see what we can get from them. I don't have anything specific, but we can get back to you.
So, okay, so just so I understand, we're not directly investing in that technology, or we are or plan to in the future?
We are investing in the satellite technology as a service, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
and how much has been done over the last number of years? You're saying 5 miles per year or 5 miles over the last year?
Over the past 10 years.
I'm just trying to get an understanding of the application of it, the breadth of it, and how it has impacted the budget.
Yeah. We have over 5,000 miles of buried water pipe. We had been averaging rehabilitating or replacing approximately 50 miles per year for 10 straight years. And we think we've got the low-hanging fruit, maybe the worst of the worst. So now we're kind of taking a step back and looking at this new technology. And as we continue to look at these pilots that are available and the new technology that are emerging, instead of just plowing ahead, we're holding it to 25 miles, which in the long run for us is not going to impact us greatly. Like I said, I think we've got the worst of the worst, and now we're just trying to be more effective and efficient using the technology tools that are now available.
Sure.
That weren't there 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago.
Thank you.
So this can see into the ground, essentially, and water in the ground?
Yes, it's my understanding. However, it sees, but yes. And it can tell the difference between fresh water and our water, which has chlorine in it and other trace elements, so they can identify.
It's cool.
It's very exciting.
What's the cost?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's extremely cost effective. It's more cost effective than the previous technologies we were using. We have other technologies that we're using. We have we put devices on top of fire hydrants, and at night it listens when nobody should be using water. And if we hear water, it can hear the hiss, and it can triangulate and tell you approximately it's 600 feet this way or 200 feet this way. We know where to look. So, and we can install it permanently and network it, or you can move it. So that's something else we're piloting, looking at. It's exciting stuff. So.
But we'll
Yeah.
follow up with you in the full-year cost for the satellite.
Thanks. Where you detect water leaks that are not on your mains, but they're on customer service lines, will you inform your customers?
Yes. Yes, yes, we will.
Great.
So wherever we see, to tell you that we're gonna make sure that we know, everybody knows.
Thanks.
And the other thing with the technology is that it is helping us not to have to dig and all those other expenses. So we want to calculate all those savings because we're just coming out of the pilot. So once we do full implementation, we'll have a better idea of those savings.
Next up, switching over to our large diameter water pipes. These are our transmission lines coming out of our water filtration plants and out into the system. We have over 100 miles of the pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe that we have already inspected and are monitoring 24/7. That's the most important pipe in our system for us, and we've already avoided close to 30 imminent breaks in the system where the AFO wire listening heard the pings and heard multiple pings and faster pings and said, you need to go intervene before the pipe breaks. So that's a great thing because we've had some very bad things happen in the past, as you're aware, in the county. So. Along with that, we're repairing pipe joints and pipe segments. We also are going through all the valves in the system, close to 1,500 valves, and we've already addressed the majority of those. In FY21, we expect to spend $58.1 million. Next up is switching over to the wastewater side, the trunk sewer. The photograph that you see there, that's something new. We're adding the program in 21. These are aerial sewers. Most often, you always think of sewer pipes as being buried, but sometimes sewer pipes are attached to the bottom of a bridge, you might see. They're also out in the woods where it wouldn't make sense to bury the pipe. It just crosses the ravine. And that's something we identified need to be addressed, and that's folded into the program starting in 21.
Getting rid of those?
Determining what the best course of action is. Is it better to get rid of it or better to rebuild what's there, rehab?
I can
Case-by-case basis.
can picture some of those in the Northwest Branch Stream Valley. And thanks to my county council training, I knew it was a sewer. I don't know how many people knew that. But it looks like that, and it's very curious.
You're very wise. That is in the Northwest Branch. That's the first one we're looking at. So well cited.
It looked familiar.
Yes. The trunk sewer program is where we're doing the also doing consent decree work on the wastewater side, and nearly all of that work has been let to construction, and over 120 miles of it has already been completed, and the remaining is in the program to get done. That's all the phase 1 work. In fiscal year 21, we expect to spend $69.5 million. Next up is our Potomac water filtration plant on River Road. We have a consent decree going on there to basically not return any solids back into the river. We just got the long-term upgrade plan approved by MDE this past fall. So now the CIP reflects that higher cost as we expected, and the revised estimate is $202 million for that project. And this project is one of the ones we're funding through our green bond program.
What's the interest rate on that?
Oh, gosh, it was low. I'm going to have it.
2.8, around there.
Yeah, definitely below 3. It might pop into my brain in a few minutes, but if not, but it was a very good rate. We had a very solid sale.
Sounds like. Can you mention what we get for the extra $200 million? the 99 versus 99.9?
That's about it. Yes, an extra 40, yeah.
You might need to explain that better than I just did. Jay?
All right. We built a solids handling facility adjacent to the plant about 20 years ago, and it has been removing nearly all the solids from return to the river.
Meaning 99%?
I wouldn't say that, but close.
Wasn't that the goal?
Well, the new one has to remove 99.9% or better.
No matter what the condition.
No, even if there's a hurricane or storm, it doesn't matter. It still has to be able to meet that guideline, and that costs $202 million
Under the consent decree,
under the consent decree.
according to MD, and all parties would have to sign off on any change to that, including the waterkeeper, right? Riverkeeper.
I believe so.
Yep. So do you expect the extra 200+ million to have any impact on rates?
Debt means debt service. Debt service adds to customers' bills. Absolutely. Absolutely will.
Okay.
No free lunch.
Next up is the Tucson plant. That's our smaller plant located in Laurel. The picture you see there is the ribbon cutting. We finished the latest upgrade to the plant. Along with that, we're building a new raw water pipeline from the Rocky Gorge bucket dam down to the plant, and upgrading the pump station, which is located up by the dam, to bring more water down. That'll bring the capacity of the plant up to 72 million gallons per day, with a peak of 110 million gallons per day. This is very important for resiliency for the system, backing up the Potomac plant. If we ever have to do maintenance there, or there's ever an issue with that plant. So it's a key project for us. Blue Plains, as we mentioned before, we fund approximately 46% of the wastewater treatment plant projects down at Blue Plains, and approximately 2/3 of all of our wastewater goes down to Blue Plains for treatment from both counties. The picture you see there is actually the long-term control plan tunnels, and the other large project going on down there is the ENR project, which is winding down. In FY21, $59.5 million, almost 16% of our capital budget for the year. Next up is Broad Creek. This was also part of the consent decree. The earlier projects for the force mains and headworks are completed, and what you see in the picture there is the work going on at the pumping station. We expect to wrap that up this summer. Next up is Piscataway Bioenergy. You see the picture there is the ribbon cutting. That was this past May. We're transforming sewage waste into renewable energy, which will produce enough energy that will be capable of running the plant off the grid if necessary in case of a storm, ice storm, hurricane. That's going to treat the biosolids from all of our water resource recovery facilities, reduce our greenhouse gases, help protect the Chesapeake Bay. It's a great program. Construction started in May, as you see with the photograph, and we are queued up for low interest loans from Maryland Department of the Environment for this under their water quality. And we signed the first loan as $43 million to get the project started at 0.7% interest rate. We have loans lined up to $120 million already queued up, and we continue to apply. They go in cycles each year and add to it. So far so good.
What else can those loans be used for?
We also use them for wastewater projects at our plants and for the small diameter sewer reconstruction, the part that's not covered by Bay grants. We back up with low interest loans.
Are they only available to water utilities?
No, municipalities, states, counties. Yeah.
At 0.7%?
Well, it depends. It's a percentage of, at the time that you
Sure.
sell. So it depends on the time.
But recently you got that?
That was the most recent sale. Of settling with the state.
Sure. Okay, great.
Next up is our advanced delivery infrastructure. infrastructure. This will replace all of our meters with a new metering system, so we won't have to drive trucks every day all over the counties. We won't have to have meter readers walking routes every day all through the counties. And most importantly, it will get us to monthly billing for our customers, stable monthly billing. So this is a project that's going to save us money, so it has a payback. Once we get the final bids in and see what the price is, we'll give you a new calculation, but we had estimated 7 to 10 years payback on this project. It also really helps our customers with leak detection on their property. We'll be able to we'll know if they have a leak. We can let them know proactively. The system will just
More frequent, yeah.
separate text, whatever they want. So, very exciting project.
Is the plan still for the current meter readers to be absorbed in other work?
Yes.
At WSSC?
Yes.
Thanks.
New projects, we have 4 new projects this year. Shady Grove Neighborhood Center is a developer project. Developer will pay to build it, and it's, as you see there, about 900 feet of 15 to 18-inch sewer, and 3,600 feet of 15-inch sewer, so good-sized sewer. Regional water supply resiliency. This is looking at a regional solution for the entire metropolitan area. Currently, basically, they're looking at Travilla Quarry. And this money is just to do planning work and help us reach out to our regional partners who would be involved in this and work on finding a federal funding source for this. This is not something that we could afford or even the area together. We would need federal contributions. So putting this project in the CIP helps kind of outline the project and gets us started on down that path to look for funding and partners.
So we need a new reservoir, is that the basic starting point regionally?
I'm sorry?
We need a new reservoir, that's the kind of starting point here?
For regional resiliency, that is the best option. They have looked at it. There was a study done by COG and another one done by, not sure who did it. It's probably Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, ICPRG, and both of them came back to Travilla Quarry as your first earliest best option. And this would take over a decade to get built. And who knows how long it would take to get through all the approvals and all. So
Why does it
we
take
need
that
to
long?
get started.
Why does it take that long? If the quarry's already there,
We
need
have to get the water
pipeline.
from the river to the quarry.
Understood.
And then get the water from the quarry down to the plant, to the Potomac plant.
is that
So that's a
design and
significant-
construction that would take 10 years? Right.
We have to purchase, we need permitting,
Uh-huh.
rights of ways, permitting could take a year or more, but
And-
will take more than a year.
And the federal
So,
grants, right.
It's a lot of ground to traverse, so.
You've talked to Senator Cardin and the rest of our delegation about it?
I wouldn't know.
That's my knowledge.
You're nodding, yes? Yes, we have talked to Senator Cardin, okay.
It's right up Senator Cardin's alley, right? Yeah. And has anything been done on this before this, CIP?
This is the first time it appears in the CIP.
So what's been done before this?
Talking about it, studying it.
Well,
Lots of meetings?
we're one of the partners on the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin.
Right.
So they've been talking about it, and with COG as well. So we participate. We're very working together.
Right. And the needs been are out there for a long time, okay.
So resiliency is if the flow of the river slows, and you're not, how does that affect the river? Is it in case there's
Terrorism.
terrorism and a pollution into the
Pollutants.
river?
Yeah, I don't know if you recall, maybe a couple of years ago, there was a sheen on the Potomac. So anything that would compromise the quality of the water source
Right.
would be a need to have a backup.
And upstream, there's what, 5 other areas that use the water before it gets to us?
I'm not sure exactly how many, Jay, do you know that answer?
It's pretty much all the way up to Potomac and Shenandoah, as I'm saying.
Right.
Many users up there. but
Right.
This would allow.
Plus industrial users, not just utilities, right?
We have two resources, or 2 sources for water, being Tucson River, Potomac River. If something would happen to Potomac, this would give us a fallback for the Potomac portion.
Right, so any failures upstream are a vulnerability for us.
Right.
Right.
The laboratory division building expansion. When we first built the lab back in 2020, we bought the land and it had the
It's 2020 now.
So it was earlier than that.
Way back in
2020.
2020.
When we built the laboratory building, we bought the property and have the plan to expand the plant to a larger size, knowing we would need to do that eventually. The time has arrived. We're doing close to 500,000 tests per year. Regulation is only increasing, so we are already beyond our capacity and are outsourcing now, which is not ideal because you don't want to lose control of your controlled samples. It's very important for reporting to the state and for the safety of our customers. So expanding the plant basically on schedule as planned and coming to the CIP now. Other capital programs, this is really just a technicality. Prior to this, we had additional capital spending that was not included in this document, the CIP document, but it's always been in the capital budget for the past, forever. What we've done to align the complete capital budget with the CIP document, now all the capital costs in here. So we have additional costs for relocations, paving, new water and sewer house connections, a number of other things. So now when you see the CIP, you're seeing the complete picture of the entire capital budget.
Go ahead.
This might be the appropriate time. It's a related topic, so we won't be able to spend too much time on it. But the downtown Silver Spring project, that is a hotel and it's seeking to proceed and has been required to build a very substantial pipe. Is it for water or sewer or both? Sewer is probably sewer. And it's a multi-million-dollar requirement that the developer would be paid back from over time. What I guess I don't understand about this is downtown Silver Spring where we want development to happen. And we are loading in millions of dollars of infrastructure cost into this private developer's obligations. And while they would get paid back over time, it seems really disproportionate. Like, why isn't WSSC paying for it and then having WSSC get paid back over time? Why isn't the developer just charged for their share of it? They have to pay up front not only for their own share, but essentially for everybody's need. And then they only get paid back from future development projects that may occur. I don't understand. Why isn't it a major capital project? I know you had said that you have a policy that growth is supposed to pay for itself, but that's a very broad policy. In this case, you have one developer who essentially is having to pay for past and future growth. And it's quite an impediment to them moving forward. And it seems not like a desirable policy for us to have in place to put such a large requirement on one project. And, we've kind of moved away from that in the transportation arena. Director Roshdi knows about this. Like, we used to have an approach where, a project comes along and there's no longer enough transportation capacity, and so that project has to make a huge investment rather than just paying for their own incremental share. They essentially have to pay for everybody's share, past and future. And it was a major, major problem, so we've shifted towards a proportional share. We have a policy that essentially says, here's what it should cost overall, and everybody has to pay their own piece. And then that allows projects to move forward because they're not hung up by a major, major capital investment at the front end that they can't afford. And why don't we do it that way? Why don't we charge development proportionally rather than making them pay for the whole expense and then getting paid back?
So as you mentioned, Councilmember Bremer, our longstanding policy since the mid-90s has been growth pays for growth. That was out of the policy that we didn't want to impose private development costs on the general ratepayer and make them subsidize that private development. What we are requiring the developer in this case to build is no different than we've required for any other developer since this policy has been in place. So it is a level playing field where it's the same requirements for each one. And but for that development, those enhancement in capacity and the sewer system in Silver Spring wouldn't have to be made. In this case, the developer has asked for a guaranteed repayment And we can't really do that. They would require a change in the policy for one specific development. And at this point, we can't guarantee that, that repayment. First of all, if we were to make that guarantee, they would be moved in the queue ahead of all the other developers who have made similar improvements and are waiting for their reimbursement as well. And just another thing about the system development charge and the policy we've had, that's raised nearly $700 million in basically funds to offset what otherwise would have been rate-supported debt as well. So it's been a pretty successful policy.
Right, I'm not trying to suggest that we shouldn't charge developers for what they do. What it seems problematic is that we make them pay up front and then they get reimbursed over time. We're the party that's best suited to absorb the long-term, implications of payment over time. And maybe on a project where it's not such a huge requirement, maybe it's more easily absorbed. But this one seems like it's really big. It's really expensive. Is this project a little bit bigger than many projects?
Not in our discussions with our development services group, and I've got to say, I haven't heard this complaint before that our WSSC's requirement is holding up a development from going forward. Usually, we're not one of the bigger costs that are driving this. So I haven't heard that before.
It's both those variables, right? It's the cost of that project and the rock that's there and the insufficient amount of funds in that sub-district.
Right.
Yeah.
Unique to that.
Right,
If it was farther uphill, it'd be different. Where it is, with not much development downhill from there, there's not much in the sub-district and not many development opportunities, I don't believe. But go on.
But, yeah, so, I mean, just according to our current policy, we would have to change our current SDC regulations to accommodate what they're requesting right now. And that doesn't seem to us, that we have other developers who have sort of advanced these costs. They pay for it. They're waiting for reimbursement. That just doesn't seem like it would be a level playing field for all of them. And we've talked to the county about this before, whether there's, whether there could be an economic development grant or somehow work out a package for this. So I don't know if the county has before considered an economic development grant for this. Yeah.
It also be remediated, right, by changing the boundaries, making that more forgiving of the sub-districts, right? Because there's multiple ones in downtown Silver Spring alone.
They're really based on the basins and where it's flowing to as well. So it's I don't know that we change the districts like that. Like we said, we can look into this again, but
one could borrow from another, but you don't allow that right now.
Correct. Yeah.
It seems to me there ought to be a more efficient financing strategy. This is working at odds with a lot of other goals. I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. But an expense this large, it seems, again, this developer's contribution to the problem is fractional, but their obligation is really beyond that.
Right, yeah, and I get that. And say if we did it similar to what you described for transportation for the county, and I'm not familiar with that as much, is then we would be advancing it in the hopes that would get repaid over time, and in the meantime, the ratepayer would be supporting that debt.
As you said, you got $700 million from this. You would still have received $700 million. I'm not saying that they should pay less. It's just a question of timing.
Right. No, I get that, and it's just in the interim, the ratepayers would have to support that advance.
Let me just add to this. I appreciate the thoughts and the questions. If this was a policy that originated back in the 90s, as so many other growth policies in the DC region did, particularly here in Montgomery County, that was a different time, and it was probably that decade therein was probably the most dramatic period of growth in Montgomery County, if not in the outside DC area, and so I would say that times change and it might be worth evaluating whether or not that policy needs to be updated given the growth projections and the different demographics that we have here in the county.
And the expense, it was probably a lot cheaper to do these projects 20, 30 years ago. But doing them now is so burdensome. It feels like WSSC is better suited to smooth out that obligation over time than individual projects. And I think it probably is an issue for a lot of other individual projects. You know, somehow they manage to make it through. Somehow a lot of them don't. I mean, there's not a lot of development happening in Montgomery County. You know, it's something we hear about a lot. And so, you know, this is part of the problem, honestly. It's a significant expense that projects struggle with. So, we'll ask you to just keep working on it.
Right, I was going to say, we're committed to taking a relook
Thank you.
at the policy and seeing what the impacts of any changes to the policy could possibly be. And I think all of the economic development policies probably need to be looked at, not just WSSC's policy. So
True.
I would urge that, other
Y'all have to
We're
row in
entities
the same
be
direction.
looked at.
We're looking at ours too, for
Okay,
sure.
all right.
But no, I appreciate that dialogue. This wasn't on the agenda, but with so many commissioners here, I think it's a great opportunity to hear the committee say that this is worthy for reconsideration.
Thank you. All right. Circle 98.
Next up, projects closing out. 13 on this cycle. I'll highlight the first three. Three new water storage facilities, Olney and Shady Grove. Standpipes have been replaced with elevated tanks, and the Clarksburg elevated tank is a new tank, so 6.5 million gallons of additional water. This improves our efficiency and our resiliency, again, having water storage ready for customers when they need it. And some impacts of reductions. Basically, bad things happen. If we have to defer our capital programs for reconstruction programs and upgrades at our plants, more breaks and leaks, delayed response time, loss of service. It interrupts our customers. It interrupts businesses in the counties. We could have increased frequency of sanitary sewer overflows, so definitely impacts there, possible fines, and not funding these reconstruction programs or reducing these reconstruction programs can increase our operation and maintenance costs, because we're spending more times chasing problems instead of being not even proactive, but just staying on schedule to keep our infrastructure in good shape. So that's all I have.
Excellent. Thank you.
So that, before we get to the amendment project, I did want to mention a few things regarding the CIP, just some summary numbers. And you heard that they were trying to keep their CIP within a reasonable bound so that they could stay within their fiscal plan goals of especially the 40% or less of budget. This CIP with the information projects that were discussed equates to about a 1.6% increase, about $59 million. Now, as you heard, there's a lot of projects. A lot of these are very big projects, so you have some big swings in some of them, and some in both directions, both up or down. In many cases, you have projects that are moving through construction, and so you see big decreases, even though the total project cost may not be changing much. And then others, you have some significant increases, like you heard earlier about the Blue Plains projects. The 6-year increase for those is $75.3 million. So that alone exceeds the overall increase in their CIP. So you can see they have decreases elsewhere. The consent decree program that we talked about is increasing from what was in the approved CIP by $42 million. So those are big numbers. And then you have some big decreases that I noted on the front page of the packet as well, in the water reconstruction and sewer reconstruction and the trunk sewer reconstruction. So they have been trying to balance some of these increases with some offsetting decreases, at least temporarily, until some of these numbers can work their way through the CIP.
How often is the cost-sharing assumption for Blue Plains updated?
The intermunicipal agreement dates back, I believe, to 1983, but it was updated about 2012. So there was a significant revision to the agreement back in 2012.
It wasn't updated between 83 and 2012?
Correct.
And it's it's based on the number of ratepayers and the use in each jurisdiction?
You mean the cost sharing? Yeah, the cost sharing was based on, on the capital side, it's based on capacity that a jurisdiction wants to have as its, to plan to, whereas on the operating side, it's based on actual flows. And,
Right.
obviously, over time, these things can change, and there's, I think the inertia of getting all the jurisdictions together to work out a change was tremendous. Getting the 2012 agreement was a major effort. So it's not something that's easy to reopen. And you have, I mean, look at on the capacity side, for instance. One jurisdiction may have too much capacity and want to sell off that capacity to others, things like that. But other jurisdictions are happy with their capacity. So you have a lot of, it's very difficult to get changes.
Some parties' interest to reopen
Yeah.
and some not,
Yeah.
but I'm surprised it's not just based clearly on the number of ratepayers and the usage in each jurisdiction. I mean, you have big population swings.
Well, I think the flows, the operating flows, are a pretty good indicator of population.
Right.
So, for instance, with the you heard earlier about the large tunnels that DC Water is building to manage their combined sewer issues, and WSSC does pay a portion of that because a portion of the flows are WSSC flows, although much smaller than what's going to Blue Plains. So they had to work out the cost sharing for that, and it's I think it's what 8%. It's significantly lower than the 46% that we're paying at Blue Plains.
But you know my concern. After years of decline in DC's population, you have now surging population in DC. You have essentially flat, largely population growth in Montgomery and Prince George's. And I hope that cross sharing is being updated to reflect that. And Vice Chair. But it hasn't been updated since 2012?
2012. Well, our flows have been relatively flat, too.
I imagine.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
And DC's probably not. How much they're using, right?
But if they exceed their capacity, though, then you do have a
Then they pay
cost.
more?
You have a cost issue. Yeah. If they have to borrow capacity from someone else,
Right. There's a provision for borrowing capacity.
There's provisions. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. I didn't have anything else to add on the specific projects unless there's other questions regarding those.
Nobody?
Well, we talked about it, but the customer resource building.
Yeah, that's an amendment to the current FY20 through 25 CIP, and that is something that we have for separate discussion. Right now, if we're done with the rest of the CIP, Mr. Roshdi is here. He's been there, WCC's lead on looking at this issue and can walk us through WCC's thinking on this amendment.
Can your rookie staffer introduce himself?
Al Rushdie, WSSC. Our headquarters, RGH, is 30 years old, and our building has not been renovated in terms of HVAC or electrical or any of the critical components of the building, with the exception of one floor that was renovated last year and the HVAC was updated. Typically, the electrical or HVAC system lasts about 20 years, and after that they start experiencing problem. And 30 years is quite a stretch. So in order for us to renovate floor by floor and getting the HVAC upgraded, we have to move folks out into a staging space. And so for that reason, we start looking at a building across the street to lease a space, one floor, so we could do this. While we were looking at the lease options, we learned that this building was also for sale. And looking at the prices and numbers, it became very clear to us that from financial standpoint, buying this building will cost us less than leasing one floor. The current building is 4-story building. It's a Class A office building. It's 120,000 square feet. 2 upper level are leased to Perspecta, which is a fairly reputable federal contractor. And they recently have extended their lease, or they're in the process of extending their lease to end of 2025 for 5 additional years. And we looked at the revenue, just the revenue from that lease in the next additional 5 years is more than half of the value or the price that we are in the discussion with this building owner. And not only we are resolving our space issue, but also we have a tremendous parking problem at that site, because when we have commission meetings or any public events, we really don't have enough parking space for those who come to our building. And we also felt that moving our public-facing function into that building, which is across the street, same distance for anybody who from Montgomery County or Prince George's County comes to our building for conducting business or getting a permit or using cashiers and so forth. So we felt that this was a win-win in terms of financial point of view. If you want more information, Mark can give you that, but I can only say that the cost to own this building is far less than actually costing to lease 1 floor, and we're going to end up with 2 floors, and that will help us eliminate some of the leases that we currently have. So that's the reason we are moving into that direction.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and the analysis you mentioned is on, the summary of the analysis is on Circle 71. And they did look at, as Mr. Roshdi mentioned, the lease potential for the 2 floors that they would not be using, as well as the additional space they would. The cost to lease space just for the RGH renovation, the headquarters renovation, as well as some additional lease savings they would have from lease space now. And ultimately, you can imagine at the end of this, if you're leasing space, you're done. That's it. You've accomplished your project, but you don't actually have any asset at that point. Whereas with the purchase of the building, after all is said and done, you still have that asset at the end of this process for whatever you may want to use it for, going forward. So staff did feel comfortable with this project as an amendment to the CIP. They are recommending recognizing some deferrals of costs in a couple of other projects that minimizes the impact in the current CIP, but you're still going to have the impact of the building purchase that we will have to accommodate in the next fiscal plan. Like I said, the numbers work over the 10-year period, but you still have to spend the money up front to get that savings. So we will have to recognize that. And I did also hear from executive branch staff late Friday that the executive is supportive of this amendment. So we probably will get something from him in writing before the council acts on this amendment.
Are you going to create a WSSC parking lot district? Or? Coming from you, Al Rushdie, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
This is the one directly across the street where I've had to park before.
That is
right?
correct.
If there's no space in your lot, right? And then cross Schweitzer, right? Okay, it's the one right across. Okay.
Until they put up the signs that asked us to stop parking.
Well, that was my fault. Okay. Okay.
So the public will have an easier time getting in.
Getting in and out.
That's a real improvement, not to be underestimated, because you have a lot of security requirements. So.
Yes. Is that lot gated too? It's not.
No.
Right. It's just drive in. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
That's it on the WSSC portion of this.
Without
Oh,
objection.
without objection.
Right. With the amendment.
The amendment will be going back to the council for action in the next couple of weeks. The rest of the CIP, obviously not until the Bi-County meeting in May.
Right.
The full council will take it up. I have to look and see what the schedule is for that. But yeah, we'll, if the committee is supportive, we can reflect that going forward.
Comfortable with the amendment.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you. Nice to see you. Sorry to keep you waiting, DEP.
Yep. Okay.
Lori, come on up. Thank you.
Yeah, our next item is a project within the recycling and resource management section of the CIP. It's the Goody Landfill Remediation Project. I've noted in the summary on page 1 of my council staff report, this is an ongoing project to implement the recommendations included in an assessment of corrective measures report that was approved by the Maryland Department of the Environment back in 2016. But what we have before us today is a project based on more current design estimates. And we have, because this committee has not discussed this project, because it did not really come back last year as part of the amendment process, I thought it would be helpful for DEP to provide some quick background to the committee on this project and where it stands now, and what we can expect over the next several years as it moves into construction, both in terms of current uses on the site and future reuses on the site. So with that, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Will you put the slides up?
Oh,
or- We have some copies, but maybe not enough for everybody. But anyway, good afternoon. I'm Patty Bubar, the Deputy Director for the Department of Environmental Protection. Thank you very much for this opportunity to go through this. As Keith said, I don't think we have had a conversation with you on the Goody project for a while, so we're going to give you just a little bit of background. And then we can kind of go into any questions that you have. So I'm going to turn it over to Willie Weiner to go through the details. Thank you.
Welcome.
My name is Willie Weiner. I'm the Chief of the Recycling and Resource Management Division under DEP. And we're going to be talking about the Goody Landfill project. You have that.
So no, I did not get the slides from you.
I did, yeah.
Okay, I'll try to.
All right.
Okay, all right.
Well,
Okay.
we have them. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to start with the.
Rich Harris, Office Manager Budget.
You have a beard since the last time I saw you. Okay.
That's correct.
Good to see you again.
Or gravitas. Yes.
We're in budget development.
Yes, absolutely. Right, right. Move favorable.
So I just want to give a quick introduction to the landfill and a little bit of the history on the landfill. This landfill is located at 600 East Woody Drive in Rockville. In the picture that you're seeing, the landfill, the total tract of
Right, it's much
County's
bigger.
probably triple the,
Right.
triple the number of people.
Yes.
Yes. So as post-closure activities, well, first of all, on your picture, you can see in yellow, you can see the limits of the property for the landfill. That's 162 acres. The footprint of the actual landfill, where trash was buried, is about 140 acres. So not a lot of buffer in this landfill. Since the landfill was closed in 1982, the DEP has been conducting, or the Solid Waste Division has been conducting post-closure activities, including monitoring groundwater, extracting and flaring landfill gas, monitoring the landfill gas, and maintaining the soil cap that was put on top of the landfill at the time. Now, in 2008, if you want to turn to your page number 3, 2008, the Maryland Department of the Environment directed DEP to conduct an investigation on groundwater contamination that was noted in the landfill. After several studies, DEP and the Maryland Department of the Environment entered into a consent order that was based mainly on assessment and remediation of the groundwater contamination. This resulted in a corrective, an assessment of corrective measures report that was submitted to MDE in 2014. And in that report, DEP was favoring one of the alternatives for remediating the groundwater. That included bioremediation and expanding the gas collection system.
What creek does this flow into?
I don't know.
Is there one?
Crab Branch.
Yes.
That resolution by the county to submit that proposal to MDE was based on not knowing if waste was placed under the groundwater table at the time. So MDE directed, after submitting this 2014 proposal, MDE directed DEP to investigate whether waste was placed under the groundwater table to be able to come up with a different capping solution. So it's important to mention right now that back when DEP proposed this remediation for the landfill, the estimated cost of this bioremediation plus the expansion of the gas collection system was approximately $57 million. Back at the time, based on accounting guidelines, the county decided to book 50% of that cost, or $27 million, as a CIP project, which is in our solid waste fund. But again, that was a very approximate estimate of what the cost would be. So then DEP conducted the study to determine whether trash was placed under the groundwater table, and found out that no, that trash was over the groundwater table. So when we submitted those results to MDE, MDE decided that the solution for capping this landfill should be different. And they recommended to put a geomembrane on top of the landfill, basically a 40 mil geomembrane with a soil cover, and expand the gas collection system. So that was back in 2016, we received the letter from MDE, and we started the design of this cap, basically, for the landfill. One of the factors that was brought into the equation was the need of excavating some of the soil of the waste that was placed in the landfill back in 1982 up to 1982 to be able to bench back and be able to anchor that cap that was going to be placed on top of the landfill, and for stormwater facilities. So we've been working on this design since 2016, and we just received back in August of last year a 60% design for this project. The 60% design showed a total estimated cost now of $61.7 million, which is a much closer estimate to what we used to have in the past. So basically what we have right now is a gap of the roughly $28 million that we have in the solid waste fund and the $61.7 million that we need to complete this project. Of course, this is just a 60% design. That was submitted to the Department of the Environment. The Department of the Environment came back with some comments, some technical comments that will help us finish up with the 90% design that will be submitted to the state in August of this year. If we follow this timeline that we have somewhere in here, we have a timeline on page 7. We are expecting to have 100% design submittal by October of this year, and be able to award the contract in the end of July of next year. After that, the project will take, so we're talking FY22, basically, when we are going to be awarding this contract. Then the project will last approximately 5 years construction, so it will be a project that will go from FY22 to FY27. And the last part of this project will involve some beneficial use for the landfill, as you can see in the last 2 slides of this presentation, which will include passive entertainment, I guess, or dog walking.
Use. Passive recreation.
With an observation area, a dog park, and solar panels. And this design is being approved by the Goody Landfill Concerned Citizens group that's been working with DEP for the last 10 years.
Are there other community stakeholders you've been working with, or would everyone agree after we leave this room that the concerned citizens are the ones you should be speaking to?
Yeah, the concerned citizens were the ones that historically we've been working with for the last 10 years, total of 58 meetings with them, the last one back in January of this year.
Other groups contacted you?
Well, homeless shelter has been working with us for the last 3-4 meetings.
Okay, but no other citizens?
No others.
No. And even with the homeless and HHS, we've tried to put them back through the GLCC, like invite them to the meetings and have the conversations, just because there's minutes and they get approved and published, and so it's a formal
58
process.
meetings, a lot of meetings.
58 meetings.
Almost as many as we have. And the bioremediation, MDE didn't accept it?
No.
After the proposal?
Well, once the bioremediation made sense, if you made the assumption that waste could be placed within the groundwater table. Once that it was determined that it was not, it makes more sense to put a geomembrane cap on top of the landfill to prevent percolation of water into the landfill. And then that combined with an increased gas collection, that will definitely remediate the contamination that we're having at the property line.
Do other counties take that approach
Yes.
in Maryland? Bioremediation?
No, not bioremediation, no.
Right.
Just the cap.
Nobody else does bioremediation
Not that I know.
in Maryland, and not DC and not Fairfax?
Not that I know.
Okay.
The regular way. See, the problem here is that we're talking a landfill that was constructed prior to the Subtitle D regulations, and all the new landfills are being capped the way we are planning to cap this landfill.
Question. So, page 4, is this what you're building, basically, these buildings? Is that what you're doing? You're containing everything?
Okay, so page 4, what it shows is the groundwater wells, that all these little blue points that you can see are groundwater wells that help us to determine whether we are over the contamination limits or not. Now, the blue shaded areas that you see are basically the areas where we're going to be excavating trash and put it back inside the landfill.
Okay.
In the lower areas of the landfill on top. So we are excavating all these areas to be able to anchor, to bench back and anchor the cap, basically.
So that's the project, essentially?
That's part of the project, big part of the project, yes.
So you remove everything, you put it back. What does that mean, anchor? What does that do?
Well, it's a synthetic cap that needs to be anchored back into the ground. Right now, the limits of waste go all the way to the property line.
Yeah.
So it will be impossible to anchor in there. You need to remove that trash.
Okay, so you're going to put a new cap on it.
Yes,
So you're going to dig away from the edge, pile it back on, put a new cap on it,
yes.
and then put a bunch of dirt on top of that.
3 feet of dirt on top of that
3 feet.
as a vegetative cover. So there is a geomembrane. Well, first you have the recompacted trash. Then you have some 1 foot of soil on top of that to give the geomembrane some stability. Then you have a drainage layer to be able to move that water, that the rainwater, move it to the sites and into the stormwater facilities and ponds. And then on top of that, you have 3 feet of soil, which is called the vegetative cover. That's where you put your bushes and all the plants with very shallow roots.
Okay. There's a lot of issues, a lot of consequences from landfills. Landfills are not without their own problems. And I know there's a lot of talk about shutting down the incinerator and diverting that waste to other communities for them to have these same problems. And I think that we need to handle our own trash and our own waste and take care of it in our community. That has been a long-standing policy for us now, I think. Although I guess the ash might leave the county, but from the facility. But just want to say, as talk proceeds about zero waste and shutting down the incinerator, you can't just export these problems. We can't just send these kinds of problems to other communities. That's not right. It's wrong. And until we have a plan to keep all of our waste inside our county, whatever we do, we have to handle our waste inside our county, in my opinion.
Yeah. So you'd mentioned the Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless. You alluded to it, and so I know all the details of that property, which you can see on slide 5 in that corner. So how would that property be affected by this? Can that be helped in any way by any of this remediation work? Because as of right now, they're not planning on going back because of the environmental problems with that facility, and so I'm just trying to figure out how we improve that particular parcel.
Well, for the administrative buildings that are there, or for the actual homeless shelter? Because
One and the same.
yeah, well, for the, I don't know, if you want to go to slide 6, we actually showed a little bit about where the staging area would be, so that with that, you know, we would not be doing any staging of construction vehicles anywhere near that property. It's going to be on the other side of the landfill, off the South Lawn Drive entrance. And our plan is to take down the old, what's it called? Where we used to take the methane and burn it. You know,
Gas
that's
to
not
energy
being, gas to energy. That's not being done anymore. So the plan is to take that down and be able to use that as the staging area for our construction projects. Actually, what we've talked to DGS about is, you know, maybe that admin building could be used as a staging area for the construction vehicles or for the construction workers, and have that be their offices. So for the next 5 years, it could possibly be reused to be able to support the construction project. As far as the homeless shelter, or as far as that building, for the next 5 years, it's going to be a construction site. So it's going to be, I mean, except we're not going to have construction vehicles going through there, but there's going to be a lot of activity at the site as we move the waste and put the cap on. So it's not going to be conducive to a whole lot of nice things happening there.
Well, I mean, aside from the work that you all will be doing, there is no desire for, on MCCH's behalf, to go back to that facility because of fears and concerns. And so DGS is in the process of building, I don't want to call it makeshift, but a more modular type of facility off of Crabs Branch, not too far from there. And so I'm glad to at least know that that property is being discussed, right? Because it is office buildings and the shelter and administrative space. I'll follow up with you as to how much more involved it can be, because if you need to use that for staging and the current clients of that space have no interest in going back, then let's rethink that space. Whether that gets captured into the project that you've currently shared or it gets redesigned to some other types of administrative space, I think it would be a shame to wall off that property and leave it, for lack of a better term, as derelict office space, because you'll use it in a short-term 5-year capacity. I guess in county speak that is short-term, right? And then what would happen of it? And the concern I have is no other tenant would want to move in because of the same lingering problems. And so if there's a way to remediate that even further, as I said, I'll follow up with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was what we had as far as the background on the project. I don't know, Keith, if you had anything more you wanted to point out.
Just wanted to know, my understanding was, and I did not actually discuss the Coalition for the Homeless issues in this packet for the very reason that you just mentioned, that the assumption that I understand going forward is that they're not coming back to this site, certainly during the construction period of this. And so what happens to this portion of the site over time is an open question. There could be some staging issues that Ms. Bubar mentioned can be accommodated during the site or during the project by the construction folks. But what happens after is not right now part of the reuse plan that is under design. That's looking at the landfill site itself. So any potential reuse of this is an open question.
Well, and I appreciate that clarification, and you're spot on. But I think it would be wise for us to include that in this conversation, because right now, hypothermia season extends one more month. MCCH is in Rockville. They're in a Taft Court, and they'll be DGS is planning on building them a new facility, which hopefully will take them through next year already, depending on the actual designs there. So we know they're not going back this year, and again, they have stated that there is disinterest in going back if the facility is under the in the current situation. So.
Right. And also the design of the project, correct me if I'm wrong, does not assume relocating the flaring system. It would still be at this site. Now, of course, we'll have a lot more experience with it in the coming years, better understanding of what, if any, impacts that system does have. But the assumption is that it's staying there. It's not moving elsewhere on the site.
Yes.
So so going back to that, so there were conversations about that, and it was decided to let it be.
Yeah, we actually looked at what would be the cost associated with relocating the flares, and it would be quite expensive to do that.
I know there were costs associated with remediating the flares, one of which included building a 100-foot wall around it, which was not feasible.
I think it was 95. But
95 foot. I'll round up. But yes, okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't have anything else on this particular project. That's it in terms of this category for the CIP.
Okay. Without objection? Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
The next up, we have the Conservation of Natural Resources CIP, including two items, storm drains and then also the stormwater management CIP. So I think we'll have the storm drain folks come up first. I'll load they have some slides as well they want to walk you through, and then we can talk about their program.
So as Keith's pulling that up, I'm Dan Sheridan with DOT Division Transportation Engineering, and my colleagues with me today are Tim Couples with DTE also, and Melissa Gardner from DOT Division Highway Services, and Veronica Joie from OMB. Oh, sorry. And we also have Richard Dorsey here from Highway Services as well. So basically there are four CIP projects within the storm draining, outfall, and culverts. They work close. Three of them work very closely together, and basically the facility planning we take in through our drainage assistance request hotline and emails. We get requests from residents for drainage assistance, and we try to do within 2 weeks. We get out to those calls, and then within a couple more weeks after that, we'll have a plan of action. Whether that might be, it could be something as assigning it to Highway Services for maintenance of a clogged inlet or something like that, or whether it needs to be something more substantial with a design. And then the other program is our culvert replacement, and that deals with basically up to 6-foot diameter culverts. And that's mostly handled by Highway Services. And they get some design support from Division of Transportation Engineering. So next slide, Keith. We're just going to go through some example projects with before. This is a before and during picture of Belfast Road. This is culvert replacement that became an emergency in our large storm event last July. The next slide is Fenway Road. It was the same storm event. It was before on the left, and during construction, see the steel I-beam that's supporting a gas main that was underneath the road. So next slide is another one that was done under our culvert replacement. It's hard to see, but at the top of the left picture is where the storm drain is outfalling, and it's just eroded completely the side slope. So that storm drain had to be replaced with a new head wall as well. Next slide is Ashburton Lane, which was a severe rain event, lack of inlets at the low spot at the intersection of Ashburton Lane and Bellhaven. On the right is an inlet was added to those low points where the large storm event, so that'll help drain those down in the future. Next slide is Woodbine Road. which was a major storm drain that outfalled, I don't know, 50 yards from Rock Creek down by Candy Cane City, if you know where that is. What's not shown in the first picture where this head wall is just toppled over is there's also exposed utilities, both electric and water. So the one on the right is the head wall is replaced, and we're starting to do more natural outfall. So it's one thing we try to do in our program is the MDE finances us through the long-term loan. They like to see green infrastructure. So when we do a repair, we try to repair with some green infrastructure. So the outfall is a series of step pools and riffles to have a more natural outfall. So next slide is Chart Oak Drive. Again, this was on the left is a severely incised area that had no storm drain. So we installed a couple of inlets and some drop manholes to reduce the velocity and step it down to an end wall in the middle, and again a series of natural step pools that outfall into parks. We work with our colleagues at parks on a lot of these because a lot of these storm drains end up in park property. Next slide is Bennington Drive. This is the slide on the left is just a severe cut. Just at the top of the cut is Bennington Drive. We came in and did a stepped wall back up with natural, and that's replanted with stakes, live stakes, so those will regenerate. Again, having some green infrastructure to that repair. Next slide is Daniel Road. Again, it's a outfall on the left that is just dangling in the middle of the air. Severe erosion downstream of it. We rebuilt the head wall and have a series of step pool that lead into, actually not very far from Woodbine. We did these right next to each other, also into Rock Creek. So again, adding a green infrastructure to where there was none before. Next one is just kind of a statement about our culvert replacement program. It's funded. The funds are expended annually. Cost range could be anywhere from $15,000 to $900,000. The first one you saw was a $900,000 repair. The second one was a $650,000 repair. And there's a map. The next page just kind of shows where those projects were completed over fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20. And I think that might be, this is just a list of how we are seeing an increase in both through highway services and their service requests, and the lower set of numbers is an increase in our drainage assistance request from fiscal year 17 all the way up to fiscal year 19. 205 is probably a high, and that correlates with the very rainy year that we had in calendar year 18 into calendar year 19, setting records for the area. So it's just an increase in the number of assistance requests we're getting. Trend. And is there another?
On that point, so an increased number in service requests is what's the severity of those service requests? Are they worse?
Well, you can see so it depends on the intensity of the rainfall, and we had two major storms last year, one in July and one in August, and those were beyond severe, exposing weaknesses in our infrastructure that we knew about but hadn't gotten to yet. And, so again, it's related to the severity of the storm. So.
Thank you.
Oh, and this last slide is just that there are no known projects in our inventory that are of greater than $500,000 value where we would have them come out as a standalone project.
All right, and just to summarize the CIP itself, all projects right now are recommended to continue at the exact same annual funding level as approved. And as you just heard, there are no new standalone projects that have come out of the process yet. But I think the story of this CIP is that we are seeing backlogs being experienced in several of these projects where the work's been identified and at some stage of the process it's waiting its turn. And this could be, generally it's going to be the more systemic work. The emergency work is getting done where you have a danger to, an immediate danger to life or property. In this case, some of the pictures you saw of flooding, severe flooding from the issues from last year, significant issue at that time, but not considered an emergency in the sense of a road washed away. So you have some of those projects which may experience greater than a 10-year flood, if you will, which I believe we built to. They may have to wait their turn, even though they look very significant in pictures. Those are some of the projects that you may see in the backlog. Some that if you get a July or an August storm like that, it's going to happen again. So what staff did as we looked through this project was I tried to identify areas where I thought there was a justification for some increased funding perhaps, with the caveat that we don't know what we can afford at this time. These projects are all funded out of the Water Quality Protection Fund. There's a loan program that they're working with. It's the same loan program that DEP utilizes for its stormwater management CIP. However, if those resources are not available for additional money, then you're talking most likely water quality protection current revenue. So that would be a direct impact on water quality protection charge rates, just as the operating budget would. And so it's a little bit difficult to know now what the council will feel it can afford at the end in terms of a rate increase on that side. But with that said, on the CIP side, I think staff would encourage the committee to feel what does it want to advocate for at this time, understanding that that may have to be pushed back or reeled back a little bit. But we want to make sure we capture what the committee is interested in doing or not doing now so that we at least capture that and have that available so that we can make those decisions later rather than just having it get lost. In this particular project, you heard about the facility planning earlier, and I talk about that on page 3 and 4 of the packet. And I did look back and see when these projects were last increased in terms of their level of effort. It's been a few years, and they were only marginally increased a few years ago. So staff does feel there should be some consideration given to increasing the level of effort in some of these projects again. For instance, in the facility planning project, I've suggested in the memo considering a 10% increase, $30,000 more. See how that works over the next year or two. See if that helps them get rid of some of their backlog, and then reconsider perhaps that level of effort again. But it is important to try to get the projects moving to a point where they can be considered either as standalone projects or as projects within the storm drain general project, for instance. So that was my suggestion on the facility planning. Outfall repairs, once again, funded at an equivalent level to past years. Just like with the others, you could consider increases there as well. I focused more on the storm drain culvert replacement project because with the inventory of storm drains and culverts we have, we know we are significantly underfunded in terms of a replacement schedule for that. We don't expect to get to 100% replacement pretty much with any infrastructure we have in the county in terms of our goals, but we're at about 25 or 30% of our goal on that, and I think we should consider an increase in the storm drain culvert replacement project. I've suggested in the memo considering an additional $500,000 in that project. As you heard, some of these projects can be quite expensive, but it helps us at least push the needle up a little bit. And then in the storm drain general project, the committee did receive a memorandum from Councilmember Friedson.
Before we keep moving, can we just cover before we get too far?
Oh, sure.
I tend to agree with you that we've had a backlog for quite a while. We have an increase in constituent requests. We have a pattern of increasing storms of increasing severity without any end in sight. And I agree with the staff recommendation that we should put more money at these levels in these two funds.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
So the facility planning was $30,000 a year. The storm drain culvert replacement was $500,000 a year.
And is this not our overall program for water quality and all that? A whole other conversation.
Yeah, that's the stormwater management side of it. This is really focusing on the quantity side, the issues of capacity in the system to deal with the stormwater. The quality side, I think, is what you're thinking of with regard to our MS4 permit and all the capital work we do there. We'll be talking about that next after this.
Okay, that's different.
Yeah, but same funding source. So that's an important element as well. We have to balance all this within the Water Quality Protection Fund.
Okay, so the $500,000 increase
Right.
is nevertheless within the water quality protection.
Right. So and that's why I always caveat that this committee, during its operating budget review in April, will have the opportunity to see all of this in the context of what it all means for the rate and what the committee is comfortable advocating for, both in the CIP and the operating budget, in terms of rates going forward.
Okay. That's good.
So the 30,000, that's for storm drains?
That was for the facility planning project.
Oh, got it.
That would basically give them, and correct me if I'm wrong, more consultant dollars to do additional planning work on some of this, to push it further towards readiness for consideration as a project. And then the storm drain culvert replacement work would at least help get us a little higher on in our goal of the infrastructure replacement cycle for that project. We're quite low in that now. So even lower than with a number of other projects in the CIP. So staff felt this one was, particularly low.
What is the flexibility for doing this work as situations come up or rain falls as you have it?
Well, you have emergency work that, as you say, comes up because of major events, and DOT does have to redirect itself to those. But we're focusing more here on the systemic work that we want to try to move forward with, just as a best practice to get to this stuff before it deteriorates further. But you're right.
But they're related.
But you're right. The emergencies will happen, and they have to be dealt with as they come up, either through redirecting resources or coming back for supplemental funding at some point, depending on how big the project is. And that's just the nature of this. They don't know necessarily where the next emergency is going to be. But
often it's probably things that we are in the backlog.
Well, it's certainly
right. The rain's going to fall, and if they've been identified as a problem, and we didn't get to them, then you have like Menlo Avenue recently was an emergency where we could have dealt with it probably earlier, right? And in many cases, like most of these remediation projects, would have cost less.
Right. Certainly, some of them could be the storm drain itself is not functioning properly and causes the flooding, or it could be lack of capacity in the system that we may or may not know about, and that this system that an emergency event highlights. And then you have to figure out how do we increase the capacity in that area to deal with the flooding.
I agree with the chair that we have issues we got to deal with, and there's one way to deal with them.
Yeah, the other project I was just starting to mention was the storm drain general project. This is where a lot of the drainage assistant request work ultimately goes, and Councilmember Friedson had sent a memorandum to the committee advocating for a doubling of the level of effort in this project. Currently, it's at $854,000 per year, so that would make it about 1.7 million or so per year, with the intent, once again, of working of DOT being able to work a little bit faster through the backlog of projects. And in fact, you have heard there was some public hearing testimony about a couple of projects that had been in planning, if you will, for a number of years, both looking for different types of solutions, but also waiting for the resources to be available. So I think those are the kind of projects that Councilmember Friedson would like to see addressed sooner if possible. And one way to do it would be to increase the level of effort in this project. As staff, I'm not sure what the right number is here. There is no right number. I think, once again, we have the fiscal impacts going forward, how we balance this with the operating. My suggestion was to continue to work with DOT to see if there is a level of work that could be ramped up in this that they would have the capacity to implement. They have to be able to move forward with this, not just giving them money, but making sure they have the planning synced and their infrastructure in place to be able to do this work. And I'm not quite sure what the right number is, whether a doubling is like what Mr. Friedson suggests, or whether it's a ramping up. So as staff, I just want a little bit more time to work on that. But I did want to let you know about Mr. Friedson's request that the committee consider his recommendation.
Meaning you want to get back to us with a recommendation?
Yeah, I would like a little bit more time, maybe come back as part of the review in April with our operating budget review, revisiting this.
Okay, while the department's here, do you have a reaction to that recommendation?
I mean, well, I guess one, it's always tough to balance where you're going to put your priorities and invest. So these are tough decisions to make. But as far as ramping up, it's always easier to handle a gradual increase and not end up in a situation where you have a big balance that could have been used for some other purpose.
Sure. If we were, for example, to double it, as the council member suggested, do you have the contractors and the projects ready to spend that or not?
I think we similarly would need a little more time to look at that. I mean, we do handle the drainage assistance request process through consultant contract, and we always get within our stated goal of meeting out with them and at least dispositioning it on time, so that capacity is there. It is once it's done and it's something that has to be designed, and are there permits or is there coordination with parks? Because I think a lot of these do outfall into Stream Valley parks and stuff like that. We need to build up our capacity there.
Can I ask, if you were to double it, that's still coming out of the same water quality protection fund, so it's other water quality work that's not getting done. What would that be, presumably?
Well, that might be more of a DEP question. I don't know if we can answer that right now, especially since, as you'll hear on the stormwater side, we're not quite sure what the final requirements will be in the next permit. But it's all competing for the same funds. So all things being equal, you would have to have an increase in the rate in order to do what you want to do, plus an increase here. We don't know yet what it's competing with until we see the operating budget come over.
I'm assuming Councilmember Friedson did not suggest increasing the rate. He was trying to shift the allocation within the existing fund, or no?
I believe he was silent on that. I mean, we have the memo here.
Right.
I think he was focusing on the backlog here. To be fair, he did not have the benefit of the operating budget in front of him.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I started off by saying I assume this will mean that other things we aren't able to do, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not fully, expending. Maybe it is a more rational way to expend from the fund to spend more on this. I don't know. I would welcome.
I mean, it's more difficult because this is work that comes to DOT's attention from requests and complaints. We don't, as you've seen, the numbers have gone up, but they don't have full control over that coming in. Whereas with the MS4 permit, that's a 5-year permit. Ultimately, we'll know what the conditions are, and it will be planned out. How do we meet that permit? And so there's a little bit more predictability with that, as opposed to this, where the work is coming in. If you get a big flood, you're going to get drainage requests from one part of the county, but they can't really control that on the way in. So we don't know. We don't know what how much this will impact those, how much work would get done or would not get done with this additional money. We know they will, ultimately, as they ramp up, they would get more done, but how much of the universe is that? We don't know.
But you're going to get back to us with a recommendation.
Yeah,
And we have
my
time.
suggestion would be that, and we don't necessarily have to have a separate meeting for this, we could wrap it back into the operating budget discussion in April.
Yep.
And follow up on it, as we would have to follow up with these other items anyway, as part of a broader look at the rate.
Just to reset the conversation or reframe it, so $47.3 million in backlog, right? That's what we're talking about, so trying to increase the funding so that we can work through that backlog.
Well, the back.
I'm taking that from Councilmember
Yeah.
Pearson's memo.
Yeah, the backlog he's referencing is from the Infrastructure Task Force report, which I don't know if the committee members are familiar with that, but that's a report that's updated every year, looking at all of the county's infrastructure projects and how close are we to a acceptable refreshment of our infrastructure. And that 47 million is an estimate of how much we have left to do in this project to catch up. But Mr. Friedson's interest was in the Storm Drain General Project, which would deal with a lot of these neighborhood drainage assistance requests, which may or may not be directly related to this. It's all the same infrastructure. But those requests are coming in because they have a major flooding event and they recognize that their storm drain system is not up to snuff in their neighborhood. Whereas this maintenance backlog is basically a mathematical exercise, looking at the number of storm drains, the number of culverts we have, dividing that by the acceptable lifespan and the costs to replace, and coming up with a mathematical number of what our goal should be.
Well, speaking of,
which is quite a bit higher than what we're at.
Sure. Well, and speaking of math, my back of the envelope math for the 8 projects that have been highlighted in this came out to an average cost of about $57,000 per project.
What page are you on?
Well, based on page 8 in this section of the packet, a list of work completed in FY18 and FY19. So those 8 different projects came out to an average of $57,000. So that's one number to keep in mind if we want to keep moving forward. But last thing I just want to ask regarding Councilmember Friedson's memo, specifically talking about Belfast Road where the culvert failed. Was that already on our list?
Yes.
So we were aware
yes.
that it was not doing well.
Correct.
And that is the point of this conversation. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I just want to say that the CE recommendation did not include increases to these projects because some of them have unspent carryover balances. And so I have the detailed numbers in case you want to see it. In addition, he recommended 2 years worth of appropriation to provide DOT with more flexibility for emergencies, the outfall repairs, which is normally how it's done, but also on the storm drain general. And if it would be necessary, we could recommend 2 years worth of appropriation in both years, years 1 and year 2. And as you were mentioning before, the MDE loan hasn't been approved. Any additional funding provided to the projects will have to affect the water quality protection charge, the rate. And every $100,000 will increase the rate for 27 cents. Every $365,000 will increase the rate at $1. Just be aware of that.
Thank you. So what is going on with the state loan program?
Do you want me? Wow. Do you want me to say?
Well, we apply.
You gotta be on mic.
Department of Environmental Protection did apply for loans for the MS4 permit, and we were approved for $60 million worth of loans. But you have to do that kind of project by project. I mean, they have to kind of understand what contracts are you going to be using to do these projects, what are the projects. So we're working with Department of Transportation to have them give all that information to MDE so that MDE can give them approval to also be able to use the loans for their projects. So it's a process that's still underway with MDE for the DOT projects. And as I think Dan had alluded to, for these type of projects where you're dealing with the drainage issues, because because the funds flow from the federal government under the Clean Water Act, there has got to be some water quality improvement that is shown before they will approve the use of the loans. And so that's part of what we're going to have to be able to help MDE understand that these projects do, in fact, improve water quality in addition to dealing with water quantity issues. But that's not really the intent of the loans,
So you are approved? I thought we were waiting on approval from the state.
No, DEP.
No, on the MS4 permit.
Yeah, the MS4.
Is not even in draft stage yet, but about the loan program?
Yeah, I thought
Yeah.
the loan program that we envisioned you all applying for in 2018, you were still waiting for.
No, we
approval.
closed on December 19th, I think.
I think if we were to increase funding in the storm drain program, it's not clear how it would be funded yet. We'd have to work with OMB and figure out, is there a capacity within the loan program funds that have been approved to increase funding here or not? If not, then we would have to go to most likely current revenue to fund some of these increases. But they're applying annually for the loans at a pretty large amount to cover DEP, to try to cover DOT, as well as park and planning for the projects that they have covered here.
No, our loan didn't cover park and planning.
They're getting their own. Oh, that's right. They're getting their own loan. That's right. They're getting their own loan.
Yeah. Andy, you want to
Covered within our fund, covered within the Water Quality Protection Fund.
Debt service, yeah.
Yeah, we're concerned about the loan program for a couple of reasons. The first is there are some threshold issues with whether or not we would qualify and whether or not bond counsel can be satisfied that if we use the money that the county can secure that debt, or whether we count against the county's bond borrowing. So that's the first problem. But even if we could, it were entirely straightforward that we could qualify and we could paper this so that we can use the water quality protection charge to secure the bonds, the amount of the money we're talking about in relation to the staff time effectively makes it arguably at least as expensive as if we just borrowed if we borrowed the money through conventional means. So we're not really finding that this is saving us any money. We're putting a lot of staff time into some very small amounts of money. So even though it's nominally a 1% interest loan, if we spend $50,000 in staff time to try to document a $400,000 loan, that's just not a very attractive borrowing proposition.
Can you elaborate on that? How can it cost $50,000 to document?
I'm thinking, Andy is the one who's dealing with this.
I know, I already asked Andy this.
Yeah. There's like we had mentioned before, we've done the application.
Right.
We made the list.
Right.
There was obviously a lot of staff time that went into making the application. And from that time.
Why is that? What's on the application? None of us have probably seen it. How many pages is it?
The application.
What takes so much time?
It's probably on the order of 60 to 80 pages, I believe. And you have to document, you have to develop a list of each type of project. You have to balance that within the appropriation that you have, and you have to justify the number of credits that you think you're going to have, the time frame that you're going to do it in. And there's a lot of back and forth with MDE in terms of meeting their regulations. As Patty said, they applied a year before us, and they only were able to close on their loan in December of last year. There's a lot of reporting. There's an entirely different level and layer of technical review above and beyond what we typically do for our projects to get a permanent approval. It's just a fairly challenging approach, and plus you have to actually build 5% of the project, so you have to figure out a way to put in money to get design, permits, and construction, and get 5% of the invoicing already done before MD will close on the loan for that particular project. And depending on, then MD is a little bit vague on the types of projects, so it's really a little bit unclear. It also precludes us from one of our big efficiencies that we've had has been able to work with in-house staff on particular projects, but that's precluded. That wouldn't be part of the system. And with the funding, we wouldn't be able to apply for loans for work that
It's
we
like,
do.
They were only paid 20% of the soft cost, which are basically personnel and design.
it's a little bit like with bond bills. We can't use in-house labor as an in-kind contribution to match a bond bill. Similar problem.
Okay, and you've brought this cumbersome system to the attention of our powerful Environment and Transportation Chair from Montgomery County?
Well, I mean, we went into this because it was suggested that this is a really attractive, straightforward, cheap way to shake loose funding for these projects.
Right.
And so we're trying it, and we're finding it's not so great.
Right.
I'm not sure we ever said it was straightforward because we weren't really sure what
to
the
be
process
fair,
was. Yeah.
We were
Right.
strongly encouraged by OMB and DEP to apply for loans, and we're applying, and we're finding it's not, it's very cumbersome. So, I mean, we could try to get a legislative fix or try to clear out some of this stuff, but I think that
Well,
there's.
it may not just be a legislative fix, sorry to interrupt you, it may not be legislation, it may be a letter, it may be a phone call, maybe a meeting.
Well, there have been several meetings with our council, our secretary treasurer, OMB staff, finance staff. We've had several large meetings to fill up this.
Right.
I mean, again, I'm not, when you say, I'm not sure all the players. There were some of the folks that were in charge of the groups there. And separately, we weren't in the council's meetings, but there's been
As
a
we've
lot
been
of work
having
done
these
on this.
discussions with MDE, part of it is the federal requirements. I mean, it flows from federal funds. So a lot of these pieces of information that they're asking you to validate for them is because of the federal law requirements that they have to meet. So, and I would agree with Casey. I mean, it's been a very cumbersome process to try to figure out. I mean, we're pleased that we actually got approved for the loans, but it was a lot of work to be able to show that documentation and meet all the requirements that they say that we have to meet. And I agree with Andy. I mean, we're actively having dialogue, trying to figure out if we can solve the problems
With MDE
associated.
staff.
Well, internally, to make sure that we kind of understand what is MDE's issues so that we can kind of try to solve it. But yeah, there's conversations with MDE staff too. Because we're going to try to solve this.
You have 8 state senators, 24 state delegates. If it's not brought to their attention and asking them to bring it to the attention of the secretary, you might have an unlimited number of meetings, but it may not get fixed. And it's pretty easy to bring it to their attention and ask them to do something about it so that the projects in all their districts get funded. I would just use them.
We're happy to try to escalate it, but I think we're finding there's more fundamental issues with this than just bureaucrats being slow or being unnecessarily difficult. This is, and as Patty said, some of it probably stems from requirements that they don't have any control over. So we'll keep working at it. I mean, we're not trying to pull the plug on these loan applications. We're just saying that in light of our early experience with this, we're questioning whether this is worth the trouble, whether or not there's another way to do this. In particular, we'd like to at least consider going forward, pay-as-you-go, current revenue using water quality protection funds as the revenue source. And the fact that the obligation to meet these requirements, it's not like we're buying a house where we want to, or building a library where you need to finance something and then we're done. We don't anticipate that there's ever going to be a time when everybody says, oh, all your stormwater projects are finished, now you're out of that business, you can pay back the loans over some period of years. Unless the borrowing winds up being effectively at a negative interest rate, it doesn't seem to us that we're very unclear as to what the benefit is of going through this loan program if there's going to be significant administrative issues and there's a more straightforward path to funding it directly as PEGO.
And we're committed to doing all that analysis, looking at trying to figure out, what are the solutions to the problem. If we can't figure out how to, make this work, and as Casey says, I mean, the payoff may not be worth it, because of the amount of staff time it takes to do this. But there will be impacts if we use current revenue. So we'd like to, if that's the path forward, we'd like to be able to discuss that in terms of the operating budget so that you can see the whole picture. Because the impacts come out of the operating budget.
The impact would be you can do a lot less now in 1 year, right? Because you're bond funding?
Well, it's either that. If you want to keep the water quality protection charge at a certain rate, then you can only do so much. Or you can choose to.
What about bonding our water quality protection rate ourselves. Why don't we funds? Why don't we do that? I mean, I know we have any disagreement with the state about it.
Well, the county did move in that direction some years ago, but the loan program had such a substantially lower interest rate that the county switched over all of its bond-funded work to the loan program.
I mean, we have
And they have a much larger base, so some of the administrative aspects that you're hearing that make park and plannings not as viable, you have the same experiences, but you're talking a $50 million loan, so the overhead is a lot less.
When you say switching to current revenue, you're talking about specific types of projects.
Well, the park projects.
Park projects.
It's a smaller amount of money. If you're stuck basically with the same level of documentation required, it takes a lot bigger set of projects to justify that overhead.
And just like getting a personal loan, there's closing costs. So, you would pay the closing cost. And so you have to look at, closing costs for their amount of a loan. Because right now it's what, $4.8 million, I think, is what they had in their loan request. We asked for $60 million. So.
Say that again.
Ours is Patty had mentioned earlier that the county's loan request was up to $60 million. Ours was placed in for $4.8 million to cover FY20 and FY21.
Remind me, which pot of state money do these come from?
Well,
It's a revolving loan.
Yeah,
it's
so
the
it's-
same system that had done water and wastewater treatment upgrades for.
Right, I mean, there's
Water
like
Act for
$300 million,
decades.
and it's a water-quality revolving loan
It was
fund.
just expanded to allow water quality projects recently.
Yeah, well, MD kind of broadened their interpretation of what the money could be used for. Well, it's called the Water Quality Revolving Loan
I think it was
Fund.
created from the Clean Water Act.
Yeah, I mean, but the
This is
state,
from
the state puts
70s.
money in too. The federal government put some seed money in it, and then the state put money, and then it just keeps gaining interest as, it hasn't all been spent, because it's been in place for 20-some years. But as Andy said, it was mostly for upgrading sewage treatment plants, which mostly has been done now, so they're like, a whole bunch of money is still available to be loaned out. So MD said, hey, we have these MS4 jurisdictions which are struggling, so let's see if we can get them to
And I
use the
think
money
it
for
does
that.
ebb and flow. MDE, when we applied last year, MDE was on generally, I think earlier you had mentioned to us when Keith had mentioned when they looked a lot more attractive, I think there was capacity in MDE's program. In the recent year, the 2019 request, they told us there was approximately $1.2 billion request for about $250 million, which is the cycle after you guys were in. So it's starting, I guess it's going to, the question of its long-term viability as the sole funding source for this type of work is it's not guaranteed, and that's a concern as well.
But that's a different issue.
Yeah.
The legislative staff that wrote the bill and wrote those regs would be very concerned if it hasn't already been brought to their attention. They didn't create the fund for the money not to be given out or to be used up in closing costs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I do think that the unique situation of park and planning and our relationship to Montgomery County is probably a new issue for MDE, and that's what's brought a lot of the discussions. I think most of the previous loans have been through sewer authorities or counties themselves.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think MDE's been, but I'm not dismissing your point, but MDE's been very helpful trying to work through this because they haven't been giving it out for MS4 jurisdictions or for MS4 requirements. It has been focused on sewage treatment. So they're trying to figure out exactly how to do that. And there's a lot of people from their end involved, but they're always willing to help us figure out how to navigate through this. So for example, like we included maintenance projects in our loan, and they were like, that's not what this is for. We're like, but we can show that there's some water quality improvements, so they were willing to, kind of include those in the approval process. So they're still trying to figure this out too, as far as how they can expand what the funds are used for. And to date, I mean, it's very bureaucratic, but they seem to be willing to try to get to yes as much as possible.
Is there clarity on the types of project that they do approve?
They want you to show water quality improvement.
Sure. So maybe not maintenance, but what else? What shows that for you?
Streams.
Yeah.
Stream restoration.
Best management practices.
Don't we have an abundance of stream restoration projects and a big backlog?
We could. We have a.
So why not apply for every stream restoration project in the county?
Well,
And then you wouldn't have that problem.
Yeah. Well, for the MS4 program, we are pretty much relying on loans to fund the construction projects.
Just
right. Our fund and our PDFs are all the what used to be GEO bond is now called state aid for FY20, FY21. And the better half of our program is stream work, but it's also coupled with BMP retrofits to treat impervious areas that wasn't treated, as well as tree planting. So far, as Patty said, at the staff level, they've been very helpful, very encouraging. What really happened is once the financial folks and the loan closure folks got involved, they are the ones that really got into these issues and have really stopped us in the tracks. So right now, all of our FY20 projects are simply on hold because right now MDE technical review, they're saying they're not even allowed to review them until the loan funding is resolved.
But I hope you would agree we're actively trying to solve this.
No.
Yeah, between our bond councils.
No, that was
and
MDE.
right.
Within MDE, they've stopped reviewing everything.
If we thought this was just about this issue of our eligibility and how to structure it so it doesn't count against the county's borrowing limits, that would be one thing, but it's the other issues that lead us to question. That's why we wanted to give you a heads up that we're having these problems, because there's sort of been an assumption since we had this discussion in 2018 that was going to be the plan going forward. And what we're saying is we're not loving this program based on our early experience.
And how involved has your GR staff been?
Well, we haven't elevated to politicians, if that's what you mean. And
how about OMB staff? How about OMB? If that's
we've talked to OMB.
Yeah, we're pretty actively having dialogue.
Yes, OMB and finance have been very involved with this and trying to figure out how to make this work.
Just to jump in, DOT doesn't. We haven't even gotten any. We haven't submitted anything yet, or we're about to. So we haven't even gotten any feedback from them as to what they would be expecting from us and if they would approve our projects as considered worth this loan. So
no, that's not true, because we actually did not include the DOT projects. We were able to kind of reserve a portion of our request for funds that we said did not exactly improve water quality. And so the DOT projects and that, so you're kind of approved already. I mean, there's a lot of what contracts are you using and all that kind of stuff.
So it's more of the administrative stuff of what is it that they're going to look at and say, okay, you have enough of this to show this type of quality or whatever. So actually, he did submit some projects and we got some feedback. We're going through the administrative process to try to get them to better understand our program, because that's one thing that we're running across is they're familiar with planned, like here are our drawings, everything is great, here's all your paperwork, versus for us it's oftentimes, oh, okay, well this service request came in and you have to go out, you have to take care of it, and then we submit it and we have to hope that it all is covered by what they're going to approve.
Okay. I just don't think you should be shy about reaching out to our elected officials and on the right committees and asking them to go directly to the Secretary's office and expedite this, because it's holding up projects in their districts. And it's going to lead to increased costs to remediate these same problems. And it's not going to get the water quality improvements that the state set as a goal. That should be very easy for them. They write letters and make phone calls like this all the time.
Can I just interject? MDE provides a lot of oversight to this loan and how they disperse the funds. And the way they disperse the funds, picking on, by the way, DEP has been coordinating this loan application and closed the loan. The way they coordinate is they actually approve project by project. So up till this point, we've been approved because we've actually submitted plans and we've actually submitted project details. So they are not going to approve anything that they have not seen documentation for. And for DOT, Dan has provided some documentation, some examples of projects, and you've included those plans. Those have been approved. It's the other two CIP projects that we have not submitted that has not been approved, that we are uncertain of. So I don't believe that MDE, I don't believe we're speaking about them in the correct manner, that they haven't approved anything. They have. We just need to submit things to them to review and approve.
Okay, thank you.
Anything more on that?
I think so.
Well, we have were we done with storm drains then? I'm trying to remember.
You're going to give us a recommendation.
Yeah, we talked about the recommended increases in facility planning and in the culvert replacement, and that we would work on a potential increase in the level of effort for the storm drain general project.
Yes.
Okay, so that
We're awaiting your recommendation on
Right.
that.
Yeah.
As we do further analysis.
So that was all I had on the storm drain portion of this. On the stormwater management side, it's part of the same packet. We're in a bit of a holding pattern, as I mentioned earlier, waiting for the draft MS4 permit.
Right.
The program itself has a modest increase reflected in it of about $7.2 million, including an increase in the major structural repair project to do some additional, once again, try to work at a backlog in that project. And there's also some reorganization of the program that DEP can discuss. And they've provided for the committee some background slides here that I suggest we go through. And then I think there actually probably won't be as much project by project discussion of this as there has been with some of the others. So why don't you
Sure.
fire away?
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Frank Dawson. I'm the chief of the Watershed Restoration Division, and Jim Stiles is here, and he heads up our design and construction. And Amy Stevens is here, and she does our planning, outreach, and monitoring. I think it's important to note that DEP's role is work coordinator and implementer of this program for the county. And we have a lot of partners, and parks and planning. We're just here, schools, DOT, DGS, DPS, watershed groups, civic associations, private citizens, and of course our staff. So I'm going to move to the second slide. I'll just cue you along. So I just want to give you a little background where we are, current MS4 permit, and I know this looks long, but there's a lot of pictures, and I will move along, I promise. So the current permit, the major requirement was our restoration goal of 20%, which was kind of groundbreaking statewide, nationally. Third slide, we were issued a consent decree in April of 2018, primarily for not meeting the restoration goal. We did meet the restoration. In court at the end of 2019. There was a $300,000 fine, or we could implement a supplemental environmental project. And slide 3 is a picture of that. That was at Olney Elementary. All other provisions of the permit have been administratively extended till we get our next permit. We're also carrying over a number of credits from the old permit, 22 projects in total. The fourth slide is a picture or a graph that shows you the number of BMPs, including outfall, stream restoration, ponds, and environmental site design projects. Most of the credits come from streams and ponds. If you flip to slide number 5, these are some shots of Green Street projects. Top left is permeable pavers. There's a number of examples of bioretention and rain gardens in communities throughout the county. Slide 6 is a number of projects that were also done to fulfill the permit that were done on public property. Again, 2 library projects, 1 project at a park and ride, and 1 at White Oak Middle School. Slide number 7 is a slide of a stream restoration project. Just note in all these pictures, there's before and afters, and there's a dramatic change when you see the amount of sediment that was coming in from these eroded banks. Slide number 8 is the Woodlawn Stream Restoration Project, same scenario. Slide number 9 gives you an idea that there are times with projects like Donnybrook where there are residences that are threatened by stream restoration. Slide number 10 is an example of some major stormwater management ponds that have been completed as part of this permit. Slide number 11 is designed to give you a sense that even though we do not have a current restoration goal, we are continuing to implement capital improvement projects. 11 have been completed. There are 12 currently in design and construction. We're also continuing to implement our Rainscapes program, our Watershed Implementation Grants program at Tree Montgomery, and street sweeping, and all of those credits will count towards the new permit. Slide number 12 is 12, 13, 14, 15 are examples of those projects that have been completed. Kemp Mill. Slide 13 is Falls Reach. Slide 14 is a complementary stream restoration project. And slide 15 is Watkins Meadow, which is currently under construction.
And notice the sign where this is funded by the loan. So MDE has a little.
On slide number 15. So they even have sign requirements. On slide 16, the next permit status, this has been a very frustrating process in which schedules have not been kept. We're looking at a new permit tentative determination, which is a draft permit to be issued this summer, along with the accounting guidance. The accounting guidance is critical because it ends up telling you how much a stream restoration project's worth in the currency of credits. We're looking at a final schedule for the end of 2020. The conditions of the permit are to be determined based on what's called a maximum extent practicable analysis. The focus is on treating untreated impervious surface. We also expect there's going to be requirements for nitrogen, phosphorus, and total suspended sediments. The new guidance does provide for, I'll call it, extra credit for flood storage and green infrastructure. And I know that we've had discussions about the value of green infrastructure in this room previously. The MEP analysis, we have to submit a restoration portfolio. It's a set of projects we would do over the permit term, along with credits. Physical capacity, which is how long does it take to design? How long does it take to construct, get a permit? And lastly, financial capacity, which I'll just summarize as saying is how much ability do the taxpayers in a jurisdiction, how much can they withstand? My sense is that at least for the moment, we have constructed our maximum extent practical analysis based on our CIP budget, and we're assuming that will be our permit requirement, but that remains to be seen. It is important to note in slide 17 that there are a lot of other things that we have to do besides the restoration goal, additional monitoring, a road salt management plan. We've been working with DOT on that. We have to inspect and maintain. We have 17,000 facilities in this county. A lot of the issues that were raised earlier by DOT are also relevant to the maintenance of these facilities. Deep breath. Okay, slide 18. There are 4 slides in here that talk about an issue that our director has been pushing strongly, this idea of geographic targeting underneath our next permit, with the idea of us obviously striving to improve water quality and habitat, but also ultimately to use this targeting to target other programs like our grants program, Rainscapes. You can slow me down if you have questions, but otherwise I'm going to march forward. Slide 19 is a map that shows you from the most stressed to the least stressed watersheds based on stream habitat, stream biology, amount of imperviousness, and the amount of pollutants that we need to reduce in given areas in the county. Slide number 20 is designed to target stormwater management practices that are not stream restoration projects. So we're looking for areas that have poor stream conditions, areas that drain into stream restoration projects to improve the value of that investment. And slide number 21 is designed to target stream restoration. We're looking for areas that have low amounts of stormwater runoff, they have existing stormwater, and they have small drainages. We want to do our stream restoration work in areas that will last a long time and not have high maintenance costs. Slide 22. I only have 3 left. Again, in the interim, we have continued to do work. We just reopened 3 suspended projects, Glenmont Forest, Grosvenor Stream Restoration, and Old Farm, which were 3 major projects that were previously suspended. As a note from previous discussions, we had suspended 44 projects previously. We have 13 of them that have been unsuspended or planning to be unsuspended, and 4 more are under consideration. So there's been a discussion about trying to figure out a way to get 10 of them done, and we're certainly beyond that goal at this point in time. The new contract.
Say that again. There's
So-
a discussion about trying to get. That was
10.
like
So in the previous discussion about the new contracting approach, it was, one of the criteria was they had to include at least 10 of the suspended projects in their new portfolio of work. So we've proceeded along in that fashion since we haven't implemented the new contracting approach with that desire in mind. So the new restoration contract,
we've done how many? Is it like
we have 13 that are either planned or in design right now, and we have 4 more under consideration. Some of that depends on when we get our new permit. So the new, what we're calling a turnkey restoration contract would be design build, again, designed to meet the metrics of the permit, targeting areas that are most suitable for restoration, considering environmental justice, also considering the priorities that are given to us by federal and state grant agencies, in addition to the loans that we discussed previously. We're going to include subcontracting provisions for local small businesses. The county's major role will be in outreach, project and contract oversight, and pursuing these grants to supplement the loans. And the schedule for this is being dictated by MDE's permit restoration requirements, and us having a better sense of that. It's hard for us to go out into the marketplace and purchase something we don't know exactly what it is. The last slide, our CIP budget for 21 through 26 is $112 million. 70 million of that would come from the loans, 14 from state aid. Keith, I think you said this is about $7 million more than the previous CIP budget. Keith also alluded to the fact that we're reorganizing the PDFs into a single countywide PDF for $75 million. And there's a major increase in major structural repairs to address our aging infrastructure, not dissimilar to the discussion with DOT, aging, and increasing storm intensity. We have a backlog of about 65 projects with an average cost of $700 to $1 million per project. They're larger in scale than those that were mentioned by DOT, and obviously they're in varying scales of disrepair. And I'll stop and take a breath, and hopefully that wasn't too fast. I plan on taking 2 hours to go through that, so that was the abbreviated version.
You did.
Okay. So Andy.
We'll have another briefing on the details,
Okay.
another time outside the CIP process.
That's fine.
We have a town hall coming up very soon. I'm watching the clock.
Yeah.
It'll soon be an hour from here. We don't get out of here, so.
That's fine.
Keith?
Yeah, staff was supportive of the recommendation. The structural repair project, once again, that's a backlog issue like we experienced in storm drains, so better to put the money in, and if we find that we need to scale back, we can do that. The other projects are sort of waiting for the permit, so we're really, they are moving forward with some of the suspended projects, which I think is in the spirit of what the council had wanted a couple years ago, with some of these suspended projects moving forward, albeit under the DBM project, but still getting them done. So I think that's consistent with what the council had wanted previously. So staff doesn't have anything else on this.
Great, okay, without objection. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Keith.